October 7, 1931. Bad Harzburg, Germany, a mountain resort town packed with aged generals, industrialists, and 5,000 brown-shirt stormtroopers. All eyes turn to the stage as one man steps forward to speak. His name is Hjalmar Schacht, former president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, and he is about to say something that will be called high treason. Standing before this crowd of Nazi sympathizers and right-wing extremists, Schacht accuses the German government of lying about the country's financial position. He declares that Germany is essentially bankrupt, unable to pay its debts, and the foreign reserves everyone believes exist are a fiction. The speech sends shockwaves through Berlin. Within hours, panicked depositors begin lining up at banks across the country. By the next morning, the third largest bank in Germany, the Danatbank, where Schacht himself once worked, fails to open its doors. By lunchtime, every bank in the nation is besieged. Within 48 hours, President Hindenburg declares a national bank holiday. Germany's entire banking system collapses. 6 million men lose their jobs. The country descends into chaos that will pave the way for Adolf Hitler's rise to power. And one man's public declaration of truth becomes the spark that ignites Germany's final economic disaster. If you want to understand how one person's words can destroy an entire financial system, hit subscribe and comment which city you're watching from. Because what happened in Berlin in 1931 is the blueprint for how truth becomes a weapon when spoken at exactly the wrong moment. Or perhaps the right one, depending on your perspective. This is the story of Hjalmar Schacht, a financial genius who saved Germany from hyperinflation in 1923, built the country's economic recovery throughout the 1920s, then walked away in 1930 and watched from the sidelines as everything he built collapsed. But his role wasn't passive. He actively chose the moment to reveal what everyone in power already knew but refused to admit. That Germany's economy was built on borrowed money it could never repay, that the banking system was insolvent, that the whole structure was about to come crashing down. You'll learn exactly how a central banker becomes a political weapon, why telling the truth at the wrong time is more dangerous than lying, and how Germany's banking collapse in 1931 created the conditions that brought the Nazis to power just 18 months later. In the years after World War I, Germany faced impossible reparations payments demanded by the victorious Allies, payments so large they threatened to bankrupt the country before it could even begin to recover. The burden was crushing, the resentment was universal, and into this impossible situation stepped Hjalmar Schacht, appointed currency commissioner in 1923 when German hyperinflation had destroyed the mark so completely that workers needed wheelbarrows to carry home wages that would be worthless by evening. Schacht performed what seemed like a miracle. He created a new currency, the Rentenmark, backed not by gold, but by the collective value of Germany's agricultural land and industrial capacity. It was financial wizardry, psychological manipulation on a massive scale, convincing people that paper had value simply because a confident man with a plan said it did, and it worked. Hyperinflation ended almost overnight. The German economy stabilized. Schacht became a national hero. In 1924, he was appointed president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, the most powerful financial position in the country. Throughout the late 1920s, Schacht orchestrated Germany's economic recovery through massive foreign borrowing. American investors in particular poured money into German bonds and businesses, seduced by high interest rates and the belief that Germany under Schacht's guidance was a safe bet. The money flooded in. German cities built new infrastructure. Factories expanded, unemployment fell, living standards rose. Everyone believed prosperity had returned, but Schacht knew something others refused to see. Germany was borrowing short-term money to make long-term investments. The whole structure depended on foreign lenders continuing to believe in Germany's ability to repay, and that belief rested almost entirely on confidence in Schacht himself. By 1929, the situation was becoming untenable. Germany had borrowed so much that it was essentially living on credit, and the terms of the Young Plan, the latest reparations agreement, had eliminated the protections that gave private lenders priority over government creditors in a crisis. This meant that if Germany faced a payments crisis, private investors would have to wait in line behind France, Britain, and Belgium to get their money back. Not surprisingly, this realization caused foreign lending to Germany to collapse. The money that had been flooding in suddenly stopped, and without new loans to pay off old ones, the entire pyramid scheme began to crack. In March 1930, Schacht made a decision that shocked the German political establishment. He resigned as president of the Reichsbank. His stated reason was opposition to the Young Plan, which he believed placed impossible burdens on Germany. But the real reason was more complex and more calculated. He could see what was coming: the foreign debt crisis, the inevitable banking collapse, the political chaos, and he wanted no part of taking the blame for disasters that were now unavoidable. His resignation was perfectly timed from a personal standpoint. He negotiated an attractive severance package of $250,000, then retreated to his country estate to watch events unfold. But his departure created a power vacuum at exactly the wrong moment. His successor, Hans Luther, was a competent administrator, but completely lacked Schacht's understanding of the psychological dimension of central banking. Luther didn't grasp that confidence is the only thing that keeps a banking system functioning, that once people stop believing, the collapse happens faster than anyone can control. Throughout 1930 and into 1931, the German economy deteriorated steadily. Production fell, unemployment climbed, the budget deficit widened. The new Chancellor, Heinrich Brüning, imposed brutal austerity measures, cutting government spending and raising taxes in a desperate attempt to prove to foreign creditors that Germany was serious about paying its debts. But these measures only made the depression worse. They destroyed domestic demand, forced more businesses to close, threw more workers onto the unemployment rolls. Meanwhile, Schacht traveled the world giving speeches. He couldn't stay quiet about what he saw as the fundamental injustice of reparations. He toured Europe and spent 2 months in the United States in autumn 1930. Everywhere he went, he gave the same message: Germany cannot pay, Germany will not pay, the reparations system is destroying the country and threatening world peace. But while he criticized reparations loudly, he remained conspicuously silent about Brüning's domestic policies, perhaps hoping he might be called back to power as part of a conservative government. By the summer of 1931, the situation had become critical. In May, the Credit Anstalt, Austria's largest bank, collapsed, sparking fears of contagion across Central Europe. Nervous investors began pulling money out of German banks. Germany's gold reserves were hemorrhaging away. The Reichsbank was losing millions of marks per day as depositors converted their savings into foreign currency. By early July, the situation was desperate. On July 6th, the Danatbank, the third largest bank in Germany, and Schacht's old employer, was forced to issue a public denial that it was having difficulties. This was the kiss of death. Everyone knew that when a bank has to deny rumors of trouble, it's already too late. 2 days later, the head of the Danatbank, Jacob Goldschmidt, informed the Reichsbank that his bank could not meet its liabilities. The game was up. Hans Luther, Schacht's successor at the Reichsbank, faced an impossible choice. He could support the Danatbank and risk falling below the minimum gold reserve threshold required by law, which would trigger a run on the German mark itself, or he could let the Danatbank fail and risk contagion spreading to the entire banking system. Luther chose to seek help abroad. He boarded an airplane, the first time a desperate central banker had resorted to such dramatic measures, and flew to London to meet with Montague Norman, Governor of the Bank of England. But Norman, himself on the verge of a nervous breakdown from the crisis, could offer no help. The problem was too big for central banks. The only solution was a complete restructuring of war debts and reparations, but that would take time. And time had run out. On Monday, July 13th, 1931, the Danatbank failed to open. On locked doors across the country were posted government guarantees of deposits, but this provided little comfort. The bank had lost 40% of its deposits over the previous 3 months, about $240 million, roughly half of that to foreign depositors fleeing Germany. By lunchtime, every bank in Germany was under siege. Panicked crowds surrounded branch offices demanding their money. Banks restricted withdrawals to no more than 10% of each depositor's balance. In Berlin, suburb savings banks closed under heavy police guard. In Hamburg, sporadic riots broke out blamed on communist agitators. That evening, President Hindenburg proclaimed a 2-day bank holiday, hoping the panic would subside. But the damage was done. The banking system remained essentially closed for 2 weeks. Commercial life in Germany ground to a virtual standstill. Only the most essential transactions like paying wages and taxes were permitted. The paralysis spread beyond Germany's borders. Banks in Hungary closed for 3 days. Another large bank in Vienna shut its doors. Banks in Danzig and Riga, in Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia were suspended. German tourists across Europe found themselves stranded when hotels and shops refused to accept German marks. The German government issued emergency decree after emergency decree. Interest rates were hiked to 15% in a desperate attempt to keep money in the country. All payments on Germany's short-term foreign debt were suspended. All foreign exchange had to be turned over to the Reichsbank. Movements of money out of Germany were tightly regulated. Germany had effectively abandoned the gold standard, even if it refused to admit it officially. For the second time in less than 8 years, Germany faced economic disaster. But this time, the response was different. There were a few small riots in Leipzig and Dresden, in Düsseldorf and Koblenz, but mostly there was what the New York Times described as resigned passivity born of a weary submission to the inevitable. People were simply exhausted. They had been through hyperinflation in 1923. They had experienced brief prosperity in the late 20s. Now it was all collapsing again. The British ambassador returning to Berlin noted the emptiness of the streets and the unnatural silence hanging over the city. An atmosphere of extreme tension similar to that which I observed in Berlin in the critical days immediately preceding the war, an almost oriental lethargy and fatalism. And it was into this atmosphere of despair and paralysis that Hjalmar Schacht chose to make his dramatic re-entry into public life. In October 1931, he appeared at the Bad Harzburg rally, his first public appearance as an associate of the Nazis, and delivered the speech that many considered an act of treason. He accused the government of lying about foreign debts and gold reserves. He declared publicly what everyone in power knew privately but refused to admit, that Germany was bankrupt, that the foreign debt was unpayable, that the reserves were insufficient, that the entire financial structure of the country was a house of cards that had already collapsed. The speech provoked outrage in the Reichstag. There were calls for his prosecution on charges of high treason. How dare the former president of the Reichsbank publicly declare the country bankrupt, even if it was true? This was viewed as vindictive irresponsibility, a betrayal that could only worsen the economic turmoil. But Schacht calculated differently. He believed that only by forcing a complete repudiation of the reparations system could Germany begin to recover. And if that required destroying what remained of confidence in the German economy, then so be it. Over the following 6 months after the banking collapse, the German economy lurched downward again. Production fell another 20%. By early 1932, the industrial production index reached just 60% of its 1928 level. Nearly 6 million men, a third of the labor force, were without work. Wages had been cut by a third. Savings had been wiped out. The middle class that had been the backbone of the Weimar Republic was economically destroyed, politically radicalized, and looking for someone to blame, the Nazis and communists both gained support as the center collapsed. Extremism became normalized. Violence in the streets increased. The democratic government proved incapable of addressing the crisis. Rule by emergency decree became standard. The checks and balances of the Weimar Constitution were effectively suspended. Schacht watched all this from his estate. He had been proven right about the foreign debt crisis, right about the impossibility of the reparations burden, right that the structure would collapse. But being right had required that he step aside and let the disaster happen. Required that he publicly declare the bankruptcy of his own country at the worst possible moment. Required that he align himself with forces he knew were dangerous but believed he could control. The Nazis promised to repudiate reparations, to restore German pride, to rebuild the economy through state power rather than foreign borrowing. And Schacht, the financial technocrat who had saved Germany once, believed he could save it again by harnessing these nationalist forces for economic reconstruction. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Within months, democracy was dead. Within years, the country was rearming for war, and Hjalmar Schacht returned to power, appointed by Hitler as president of the Reichsbank once again, then as Minister of Economics, tasked with financing Germany's rearmament and preparing the economy for war. He performed this role brilliantly until even he became uncomfortable with where Hitler was leading the country. But by then, it was far too late. The forces unleashed by the economic collapse of 1931, the forces that Schacht himself had helped to unleash through his calculated betrayal at Bad Harzburg, had taken on a life of their own. The banking crisis had destroyed the middle class, radicalized politics, discredited democracy, and created the conditions for totalitarianism. The lesson from Berlin in 1931 is this: in a financial system built on confidence, truth can be a more powerful weapon than any lie. Schacht told the truth about Germany's bankruptcy, and in doing so, he accelerated the very collapse he claimed to oppose, because there are moments when revealing what everyone secretly knows destroys the collective fiction that keeps systems functioning. When speaking uncomfortable truths breaks the spell of confidence that holds everything together. When one man's words, chosen carefully and delivered at precisely the right moment, can bring down not just banks, but entire political systems. If you found this story valuable, hit subscribe and share this video, because understanding how Germany's banking collapse enabled Hitler's rise to power is essential for recognizing similar patterns emerging today. The same dynamics of debt overload, political polarization, and elite betrayal that destroyed Weimar Germany are visible in numerous countries right now. And knowing this history is the first step toward avoiding its repetition. The most terrifying truth about 1931 is not that the collapse happened, it's that so many people in positions of power saw it coming, and knew it was inevitable, and chose to position themselves to profit from or survive the disaster rather than prevent it. Hjalmar Schacht was the most honest of them. He said publicly what others only whispered privately, and in doing so, he became both hero and villain, the man who told the truth and the man who helped destroy democracy. Because sometimes in history the truth doesn't set you free. It burns down everything you've built and leaves you standing in the ashes, wondering if honesty was worth the price.